One of the first things we need to know is that we're a mixture. We're both fixed and growth. In a fixed mindset, we believe that we can learn, but we also have this belief system that certain parts of our intelligence or our talent or our personality are deep attributes. They're fixed. And that all we need to do is find situations where we can prove that we have a healthy dose of them. Whereas in a growth mindset, it's this idea that intelligence, personality are malleable. They can change, they can grow. And it's through taking on challenges, through working through our mistakes, and through learning that we then change this belief system about ourselves, that we can grow and improve. If you have more of a growth mindset, you will work through your difficulties and struggles. When we focus on building growth mindset within children, when they hit a challenge or a setback, they have the persistence and the resilience to keep going. So one of the first things we need to know is that we're a mixture. We're both fixed and growth. And so in a fixed mindset, we believe that we can learn, but we also have this belief system that certain parts of our intelligence or our talent or our personality are deep attributes. They're fixed. And that all we need to do is find situations where we can prove that we have a healthy dose of them. Whereas in a growth mindset, it's this idea that intelligence, personality are malleable. They can change, they can grow. And it's through taking on challenges, through working through our mistakes, and through learning that we then change this belief system about ourselves, that we can grow and improve. So we have a number of validation studies that we've run recently in organizations. And what we know is that it has a profound effect on motivation. Because in the past, we could just direct people. We could give them a set of direction and direct them. What we now know today is that we've got to continually be agile, we've got to continually adjust, which that people need to be able to then actually monitor and modify goals, be able to persist through uncertainty. And so the research has shown that really having a deep understanding of how motivation works in the brain, how it works for individuals, teams and organizations is very important. So I began collaborating with Professor Carol Dweck in 2012 because we saw a need to build practical tools, processes and systems to help organizations, schools and governments build a persistent growth mindset. Through a number of collaborations and validation studies with Professor Carol Dweck and her colleagues in the University of Texas and Indiana, we've then built a set of tools, systems, processes for organizations to build a persistent growth mindset. And as we find new things or we gain additional understanding of how to build persistent growth mindsets, we modify. Currently the work is drawn out of the areas of neuroscience, motivation science, social psychology, neuroscience, and a number of other areas. And the idea is to help really organizations build a sustainable growth mindset culture. So one of the things we looked at is an area called fixed mindset triggers, and we set a hypothesis to test out whether this was in fact an issue or not. And so what we found is that when an environment has a high prevalence of fixed mindset triggers, which is things like high effort, I have to work hard at something, people start to become fearful that they may not look capable, or feedback, when feedback is actually criticism based and it's threat based, people become anxious. And what brain scans have shown is literally the brain runs away from the mistake and the brain goes cold, so much so that people's ears are blue. Comfort zone is this idea of, if I take a risk, do I measure up? Am I going to look like I actually can do this? How are others going to judge me? Challenges is the fact that you have to take on new learning. To deal with a challenge, you need to learn new things, you need to learn new knowledge, skills and behaviors. And if you keep doing things the same way over and over, you're not going to solve them. Then there's success of others, which is about being compared from one person to another. So when people are compared, they'll start to lower their goals so that they can actually look good in the face of others. So these kinds of triggers, and there are a number of them. Failure and setback is the last one. So when people fail, do they hide the mistake, or do they have the safety to be able to say, hey, I've just got a fabulous struggle here and I need some help. And it's the new normal. Having a failure or a setback is normal, and it's okay to talk about it. It's this idea of, well, how can I learn or move from it? This is critical, and we found that when we can reduce the impact of these triggers, what we do is we actually improve performance. So we get higher performing teams, we get better, greater innovation. So people start to innovate better. We start to get greater diversity. So inclusion works so much better because people are more tolerant of other ideas and other opinions, and we get faster growth. And Microsoft has shown that, because they've moved from a culture of fear and risk, of avoidance of risk, to a culture where they embrace failure. They take on risks, and this idea of setting small experiments in order to achieve very bold goals. And so what we've shown is that a growth mindset equates to good company growth. And that actually functions at 3 levels. One is individual, one is then team, and the other one's organization. So in organizations, we've really got to look at systems and processes. How does the performance system work? Because if a performance system is really only measuring revenue, for instance, then people are not going to take on new learning. But how do we not just set performance goals, but how do we set learning goals? How do we ensure that people actually focus on what new skills or habits or behaviors that they need to build in order to take the organization forward? And so every person needs a learning goal to work on through this idea of deliberate practice. The second aspect is then talent management systems. So we find that even the way that you use language in an advert or in a recruitment process is quite the key. There's certain kinds of words that you use, and you can then start to actually indicate to the market that you're interested in the development of people, and that starts to attract the right talent. So the systems and processes in an organization matter. At a team level, it's starting to build this idea of psychological safety, which is this thing of high safety, high autonomy. That it's not about directing people, it's about coaching people and supporting them to achieve goals. And so in that, teams need to be able to, one, understand what they need to do for each other. They need to understand how to collaborate better, how to problem solve better. What happens in cultures where people go, just have a growth mindset, we find it becomes a weapon. So it becomes weaponized in an organization, and then people start to resent it. And they don't really believe in the concept or believe in the idea. And so this is quite important, is how we establish it. That's a good question. So it's actually both. Because top down is about, a leader really needs to endorse this idea that developing people is important, and that CEO models those behaviors, models that when you make a mistake you can call it out and you can actually work it through, and coaching people around how to achieve a goal, how to deal with a gap or a setback, as opposed to actually just directing people and hoping that that's going to achieve something. So it's the CEO's role is to, with the leadership team, is to really model a growth mindset, to be humble and to really coach people forward, as opposed to probably being more directional. Bottom up, you really need people in the bottom, throughout the organization, to be able to have the opportunity to work on their learning goals, to have the opportunity to learn what puts them into a fixed mindset, how to move themselves back into persistent growth mindset. And this is a combination of helping them understand what triggers their fixed mindset. So I think it's both ways. And then there's the middle level. So a lot of organizations really are led by your senior or your middle management. And so it's really giving middle management the tools to coach and support people into a persistent growth mindset. And no matter who you are in the organization, you have a learning goal. What's interesting is Carol went into a bank, and the learning culture was so pervasive that even when she went in, the security guards were waving their books at her saying, "We've read your book." And there was these interdisciplinary projects through the whole organization, and people from every level of the organization were signing up to contribute. The cleaners, the security guards, no matter who they were, everyone was involved in growing the organization. And I think that signals very, very important. But that has to come from the CEO. So here's an interesting piece of research that was done on Silicon Valley startups. And what they found was they measured the founder's mindset. And where the founder had more of a fixed mindset, they tended to hire people who were more like them. They tended to cut corners more. They tended to hide mistakes and made unethical decisions. A growth mindset founder, so a founder that showed more of a growth mindset, tended to hire people that were different to them. They hired people who actually had different or more capable than they were, people who had different skills. They tolerated mistakes because they knew that that was key to growth, and that what was important was having a culture where there was the ability to think differently and to change things quickly. What they found was that a fixed mindset culture raised less money in the next round of funding than a growth mindset culture. So a founder that had more of a growth mindset will raise more money in the next round of funding, which then builds for sustainability of that organization. So if we want to build new companies in an emerging market, helping a founder establish the culture early on is really critical for its survival. So the impact on children is really interesting. It's 40 years of research. So there's a number of studies that have shown some interesting results. There's a study that was done in Chile, and they looked at children's income levels. And so they looked at high income and low income. A child who comes out of a low income environment, the school's often quite poor too. If they show persistent growth mindset, they academically do as well as a child who is in a well-resourced environment with a fixed mindset. Well, that makes sense, because basically, if you have more of a growth mindset, you will work through your difficulties and struggles. The second study is around mathematics. So in year 7, this is when children go from primary school to secondary school, often their marks start to drop off because the work gets more demanding. A child with a fixed mindset response gives up. If we build a persistent growth mindset or develop a growth mindset in children, and that's not just telling them to have a growth mindset, that's really building the skills and the tools for them to have a growth mindset, we find the math scores actually recover and go up. So what the validation studies show that if we just coach children in mathematics, their scores don't recover. If we build the persistent growth mindset, their math scores improve and continue to improve. So what's important is that when we focus on building growth mindset within children, when they hit a challenge or a setback, they have the persistence and the resilience to keep going. Absolutely. So what we found in research is how a parent responds to failure is critical. So if a parent, when a child fails, and a parent sort of makes the child feel guilty or makes the child feel shameful, what will happen is the child will start to look to lower the goals. Children will start to look for goals where they can easily succeed, so they get positive praise. So really, how a parent responds to failure is critical. And if you respond in the wrong way, you create a fixed mindset. So really, when a child fails, what you need to do is say, hey, gee, I noticed that didn't go so well, or that didn't quite work. Do you want to talk about it? Should we unpack what happened? Or do you want to wallow in a bowl of ice cream first? And once they're ready to talk about it, say, look, that didn't quite work. Let's work out what the gap was. Let's try and work to improve those skills, and let's just improve it a little bit each time. So when a parent focuses on the process, focuses on step-by-step process of improving, rather than saying you didn't get the mark, that child will build a more persistent growth mindset. So the next time they hit a setback or failure, they really have the skills to work it through rather than giving up.